Howdy, everybody. Congratulations on surviving round one of the practice rounds. And as I told you I was going to do in class, I'm going to talk like I am the third place team, which in this case is Team B, Barefoot Shoes. That's Chris and Debbie. Now, I will talk about this like I'm very serious about these results and what I'm going to do in year 12. We know that's not the case because this is the practice round. I really, really want you to pay careful attention to these next three videos because I'm going to talk you through my thought process on how I interpret the results and what I want to do. It doesn't matter that you match what I do. What matters is that you have a systematic way to approach these results. Um, I jokingly have this saying that I teach the West Texas School of Management, which is how we doing, why we doing, and how we going to do better. Um, and then I recently had a former student from several years ago come up and say, you know, that idea of how we doing, why we doing, how we going to do better. I use that in my job, and it's really helpful. So I said, well, I guess I need to keep talking about that. The footwear industry report is very important in the simulation for figuring out how you did. You get a little bit of insight on why you did. Uh, when you get into the competitive intelligence report and the company operating report, that's where you will see even more on the why. The real, the real thing I want you to get through this simulation is this rigorous process of interpreting your results, figuring out not only how you did, but why you did, and then logically taking steps to try to improve your performance or to maintain a high performance in the subsequent rounds. So it's very important to me and very important to your learning that you develop this sense of how do I figure out what's going on and how do I make logical corrections. It starts by correctly interpreting the results. So I'm going to walk you through this exactly how I think about this. Now, you may see me looking over to the side because I printed all this out in paper and circled the key points and the like. And I would encourage you to do that. I do, in fact, keep paper copies of the whole simulation, the entire simulation, because it helps me keep track of what's going on. All right, you've been looking at this results screen. This is the first key element in how I did. I see in Barefoot Shoes, I had a cumulative score of 69, which put me in a solid third place, way behind F, a good distance behind A, somewhat ahead of E, and way ahead of C and D. And again, we're not going to get our feelings hurt, but to be honest with you, I look at teams C and D and I'm not going to pay much attention to them when I interpret these results because they didn't do very well. So I'm going to assume they didn't do much right. And I will try to figure out maybe why they didn't and whether I need to watch what they're likely to try next. But I'm going to focus a lot of attention on F and A because they were the people that outperformed me. On to the next page. From these next pages, there really aren't any surprises because I already have that information based on seeing that first upfront score. Remember, the elements are earnings per share, and I would expect to find myself in third place in earnings per share here in Team B, and sure enough, I do. Team F was in first with the highest earnings per share, A next, and then me. Same thing in stock price. I'm sorry, same thing in return on equity. If I scroll down, then I look at the stock price. Remember that this is 50% of the score is your stock price. In reality, your stock price, your earnings per share, and your ROE move in incredible correlation, as well they should, because profits are the key things in all three of these earnings, I should say. So they're always going to line up. Notice that Team F stock was up quite a bit. Here in B, you can see my stock is actually down. Investors were expecting me to do better. The analysts thought I should be doing better, so my stock price actually went down from year 10 to year 11. This is, I think, the stock price is the single best indicator of your performance. It has a little bit of memory but not a lot. And one of the reasons I weight it so heavily in this game, even though it lines up very good with ROE and earnings per share, is there's quite a bit of memory in ROE and earnings per share in the game to date scores over here. Not much in, well, actually none in the stock price. So what this does is this allows teams that maybe get off to a poor start and kind of figure it out later on. This is how you get a chance to catch up because I weight the stock price so heavily. But once I've seen how I finished, I'm not going to get any surprises looking on this page. Credit score, remember, does not officially count in the scoring, but it matters because my credit rating dipped from an from a B plus to a B. Everybody's okay. Team D with a C, that's pretty bad. So really, Team F was the only one that kept their credit rating probably where it should be. Image rating. This is driven by market share and your corporate social responsibility and by the quality of your shoes. So Team C is sitting here with a very good score. I don't know whether they did that because they're building good shoes or they've got a lot of market share, but that's something I'm going to want to look into regarding Team C. Now, I told you I don't really pay a lot of attention to them because they finished next to last, but I'm wondering what they did to get such a good image rating. This will talk about the high expenditure in corporate social responsibility last year was 1.5 million. The average for the industry was 910,000, and at least one person spent no money in CSR whatsoever. Next screen is gameisms, but they're important. The first, the Bullseye Award, has to do with forecasting accuracy, and I can see that we all over forecast our revenues a little bit. Not too bad, except for Team A. We were pretty good, to be honest with you, 1.3%. Our variance was only 7.8%, so that's really, really very good in terms of being accurate. And then our image rating was right on the money. So to be honest with you, I'm not sure why. Yeah, I do see here. Earnings per share has to be plus or minus 5%. So if we were a little bit closer, we would have gotten a Bullseye Award for forecasting accuracy. So hey, I feel pretty good about how accurately my numbers reflected. You'll find typically they don't. And when you see huge variances like this, this is problematic for these teams. Here you can see they thought they were going to get a lot more earnings per share, even though their revenue target was pretty close. I bet they made some private label bids that didn't come through, something that I may or may not be able to check out later. Leapfrog Award simply rewards teams that have done poorly with big jumps. You would love never to win the Leapfrog Award. You would rather prefer to have steady performance throughout. Now I begin to get a little bit of insight into the why I did and what's going on in the industry as a whole. So I look at this and see, as an industry, we underuse superior materials a little bit, so it would have been cost advantageous for me last year if I'd used a little bit more superior materials than I did. Plant utilization as a whole was up 9 points over year 10, okay? Ending inventories, not too far off the mark. You can see the beginning year 10 inventories was 780. Now they're 773. So we didn't have a lot of overproduction in industry wide. That's good. If we get in here, it says this is what's forecast to be global demand. These are common words. Then it gets down and does a very rudimentary supply demand analysis. Excess supply of 28% is likely to boost competitive pressures. Not really, because you can see down here, nobody initiated new construction. So we're going to have the same amount of capacity last year that we had this year. And in fact, demand's going up a little bit. So that part isn't really different. Very importantly, if somebody has sold capacity, this is where you'll see it become available. And this is really the only thing in the situation, in the simulation, that is first come, first serve. If somebody puts their capacity up for sale, it'll show up here in the footwear industry report, and the first person to go into the decisions and log a decision to buy that capacity will be the first one that gets it. So this is going to become important later on as I keep track of what other people are doing. So this is a source of competitive intelligence for me. But this year, nothing happening. The financial summary gives me a really good insight into answering the why questions. So again, I'm looking very closely at A and F because they were my leading competitors. So first I start with revenue. First of all, everybody's got decent revenue. That's good because if you run yourself in the dirt, you're not doing yourself any favors. Actually, I was the #1 team in the #1 company in the industry for revenue. So I'm a little bit hacked off. I only finished in 3rd place. I can see that A was actually last. That's interesting. That's something I'm going to want to think about some more. Team F, well, I said I was the top, but actually I'm not. Team F outscored me a little bit. Okay, so that would explain perhaps why they're a little bit ahead of me. And in fact, if I look to the next column, I can see they got the same revenue as I got, but they got it with much cheaper shoes than I got. So there's a 20 million difference in our cost of goods sold, even though our revenues are the same. So pretty easy to see where they came with that advantage. Notice Team C had pretty good revenue, but and their cost of pair sold was just a little bit underneath me, so they weren't too bad. Warehousing expenses, these tend to track with revenue, but I'm looking for something that's way off the industry average, so I'm a little bit above the industry average, but then again, I sold a lot more than the industry average. Marketing, right around the industry average, a little bit high. Team D was the low person in marketing. Again, don't mean to be unkind, but since they finished in last place, I'm not sure I put much credence in that. And I can see that A outspent me a little bit, F outspent me a little bit more. Okay, admin and expenses, these should just pretty much track with market share, and they do. This isn't going to make or break the bank. And then you can see the operating profits. Team A with 44 million, me with 37 million, but Team F with 52 million. And you can see that Team E wasn't too far off the mark in terms of operating profits. So might need to pay a little bit more attention to them than I was first thinking. Taxes, you're going to pay taxes. And then we get over to the net profit. And you can see here I was at 20 and E was only at 19. So I'm going to have to pay a little bit more careful attention to E. They chose to cut their dividend. Don't know why they did that since they were profitable. That's really why I finished. My score is better than them. They got whacked on their stock price for reducing their dividend vis-a-vis me. In fact, I'm going to go back and look on my hard copy printouts. My stock price was $22.89, and theirs was $18.81, even though in terms of our net profit, they're almost identical. And a lot of it falls with the fact that they cut their dividend. So the investors whacked them for that. Team A did a small stock buyback. Here, 1, 2, 3 teams ran out of cash. I finished with 3 million. That's like perfect, but it's almost too close to zero because if I run out, then I have to get an overdraft loan, which carries a higher interest rate. So being small but not zero is where I want to end up. Here I look at long-term debt. I took out a little bit more long-term debt, so that means that next year my interest expense is going to be above the industry standard because I've got more long-term debt. I've already noted in here that Team E cut their dividend. Again, don't know why they did that, but thank you for doing it because it allowed me to win this or finish better than you this round. And then I come down to this. These are where you look at the ratios. I recommend you look at these percentages very cautiously, not carefully, but cautiously. Because, for example, if I see Team A had the lowest cost of pairs sold, and you go, woohoo, woohoo, that's great. Well, it depends on their strategy. If somebody's running a cost leadership strategy and is trying to run a low cost position as well to stimulate demand, their cost of pairs sold is always going to be pretty high. But you're going to see their marketing expenses, for example, are a little bit lower because they got a lot of revenue to spread those marketing expenses across. So I recommend you be very cautious about marketing expenses. So here you look at this and you say, wow, Team A spent too much money in marketing. Well, not necessarily. Here's one of the most important things you need to pick up: days of inventory. This is how much shoes you had left over. I did great at 16 days. That's like perfect. Team A's got 166 days of inventory. That means they basically have almost a half year's stock of shoes sitting in inventory. That's a lot of shoes they built this past year and did not sell. And as I've emphasized several times, this is a real hindrance for them going into next year. They're going to have to make some hard decisions. Do they do inventory clearances, which probably will be done at relatively poor profit margins? Do they scale back on their production and just try to sell these out through normal sales channels? The problem with that is your manufacturing cost per shoe will go up if you cut dramatically back on your production. So to be honest with you, even though Team A finished well, I know that in reality, I am set up to dramatically outperform Team A next round, because this is going to be a burden for them that they're not going to soon or easily get rid of. They can soon get rid of it, but it will be painful in the process. You can see in here a lot of high default risks. This is simply because the industry didn't earn a lot of money. And so it's doing some comparisons and it's not very happy with what's going on. So when I look at people's financials, that gives me an idea of what people are doing, who's taking out a lot of debt, who's cut their dividends, as well as who's selling shoes and what profit margins they've got and the like. So this is a very important, not only how I did, but also why I did kind of chart. Because I am the administrator in this, my printout doesn't have a very important column. In all of your printouts, you're actually going to see your numbers right down here to compare. And that's very important because you want to, this is where you start getting into the why you did. You want to start comparing how you did versus the industry low, high, and average. So for example, I've written down on my piece of paper where I scored on some of these. In my productivity in North America, for example, this is me, Team B. I had the highest productivity of 40/80, which is an advantage, but not so much to make a dramatic difference. Ultimately, it's all about what's my total labor cost per shoe. Mine was $5.41, so you can see I was close to the industry average. That tells you in terms of total compensation, this was probably me too, because I have a very productive force, but my labor costs are near average, which tells me my total compensation must be pretty high too. Do not think that you have to cut compensation necessarily to get your labor costs down. I've seen people with the lowest labor cost per shoe have high compensation, and I've seen them have low compensation. It all has to do with fit. But I can go in and check these things. These begin to be important answers to the why I did. Because what I want to know is, how do I compare to everybody on all these numbers? What are my manufacturing costs like? Again, I can't do that in isolation, because if I'm building an 8-star shoe and other people are building a 2-star shoe, my shoe is going to be more expensive to manufacture. That's not a big deal. When I get down to the bottom of the page is where the rubber meets the road, because this tells me my operating profit. So for example, my operating profit in the internet market in North America was $21.55. So I'm above the industry average. That's a good thing, not the top in the industry. In the wholesale market, my profit margin was $6.29. I'm below the industry average, so I'm sitting down there. Is that a mistake? Not necessarily. It's just this is where I am, and I'm starting to see where I fall and how that contributes to my success. Here, I've looked ahead. I was the only person that won private label bid in Asia Pacific. You can see I made a whopping 80 cents per shoe. That's not very good. Um, in North America, I made $4.44, so above the industry average, only $1 off the high, so that's pretty good. Down in Latin America, you can see there were some even better profit margins being made in the private label market. And lastly, celebrities. Hey, I signed Peyton Manning, uh, got him for $5 million. Nobody else bid on Peyton. Boo hiss. So I could have bid whatever the minimum it was accepted. I was still wanting, so it's like rats. But it's the way it goes. 5 million is probably not too high. You can see here uh, for Oprah, two teams both bid 5 million. That might have been me, and the computer might have said, well, he's already put Peyton as his first choice, and that's how it broke the tie. And you can see for this Cristiano Romano, we had several bidders. Down here gives me a sense of where the market is going. And you can see in all cases, there was a fairly dramatic drop in the internet price, an increase in the wholesale price, and that's true in all four of the regions, and anywhere from a slight uptick in quality, excuse me, to flat in quality. So that in general is where the industry went. Notice that you can save these if you want, and I do save several of these files. All right, that's the footwear industry report. I'm going to stop the tape and join me for the competitive intelligence report.